Okay. Before I start, I just want to recognize our whole team that has been working on this. It's been a big undertaking for us. Dina Gonzalez, who has been pretty much our project team lead on this, and helping communicate with our neighboring states, Connecticut and Massachusetts, on their methodology. Catherine Menke, who has been our moves modeler and transportation expert. Brianna Seltzer, who has been on loan from us from our inspector section of our office, worked through the rec allowances. And Owen Jackson, our newest member, he's been working to understand our whole process, doing some calculations for us. So it's been a great effort by the entire team. Yeah. So this is something you have all seen before. Just a reminder, our target set by the Resilient Rhode Island Act, 10% below our 1990 levels by 2020, 45% below 1990 by 2035, and 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. So our update today, I promised you last EC4 meeting, we were number crunching, looking through data, and we have some exciting results to present today. So we have completed our 2015 and 2016 greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Our 2016 emissions that we calculated, actual emissions, 11.02 million metric tons. And that means that we fall 11.7% below our 1990 levels. So currently, at this point in time, we have reached our 2020 targets. It's important to note that even though we have achieved our 2020 targets, it does not mean emissions cannot climb in the future when we do our 2017, 2018, 2019, etc. Emissions inventory. So this graph here is representing, the gray line is representing at the top our 1990 level baseline emissions set at 12.48. The yellow line is setting our 2020 target at 11.23. We have our 2035 target and our 2050 target. The navy blue line is representing our historic emissions inventory calculations. So as you can see, our 2016 inventory emissions currently is set at 11.2, slightly below our 2020 target. So taking a look at this kind of at a bigger picture, we're breaking down our major sources of greenhouse gases here in Rhode Island. Again, this is not a big surprise to probably most of you all in the room. Transportation, again, in 2016 is our largest emitting sector, and followed by electricity consumption and residential heating. So in the graph on the left, we just show some of the historic 1990 level emissions broken down by sector instead of just seeing the overall total number of 12.48. You may notice that in 1990 level here, we have accounted for land use change, an adjustment of negative 0.29, so the carbon that is captured within our land within Rhode Island. This number was calculated for us for the 2016 greenhouse gas emission reduction plan, and that was done by ABT. After follow-up conversations with ABT, our Division of Forestry, our partners in Massachusetts and Connecticut, we didn't feel comfortable carrying out the land use change adjustment for future emissions, but it's something that we're keeping our pulse on because there isn't currently a set standard methodology for all states to use in accounting for greenhouse gas emissions. So again, we're in conversations with our Division of Forestry and the work that they're doing with the Doris Duke grant. And also, NASA also has a carbon monitoring system multi-state working group. So they're looking at relevant scientific advances for forest carbon monitoring and modeling. So we'd like to keep our pulse on the work being done in that area to determine if in our future inventories, that's something that we should be including to accurately represent Rhode Island emissions. I'd like to point out, real quick, sorry Liz, so our three largest sectors in 2016, transportation, electricity consumption, and residential heating. Our main focus in our end of the year report will be on these three sectors, but the other sector includes this 3% here, includes emissions from agriculture, waste, and our natural gas distribution lines. So we put together a chart just to describe some of the trends that we're seeing. On the left, you'll see 1990 level emissions compared to our current 2016 level emissions. Some things may jump out at you. Electricity consumption has slightly risen, as well as the industrial heating and processes sector. We will be going into more detail in reasoning behind that into our end of the year report. But as of right now, our thinking for industrial heating and processes, the impact may be extreme weather events. In 2015, we had our polar vortex. In 2016, we had record warmth for our winter months. So we may see that. But overall, our emissions are trending downwards between 1990 and 2016, and also just looking at the most recent 2015 and 2016 data. So jumping into our transportation sector, our methodology that we're using. So our transportation sector is made up of our highway vehicles, aviation, lubricants, and non-road. So as you can see, highway vehicles is always kind of on people's minds. How do we reduce emissions from our highway vehicles? For highway vehicles, this year, we have decided in our inventory to use EPA MOVES modeling. The reasoning behind that, in previous years, we had used the SIT inputs, the state inventory tool recommended by EPA. EPA also recommends, if you would like, to use the MOVES input. So SIT only covers fuel consumption and vehicle miles traveled. It takes kind of the national averages and then apportions them down to Rhode Island-sized data. Our MOVES input, we're able to pull very specific Rhode Island information, age distribution of the vehicles on our road, the blends of fuels, our inspection program. We're also going into that is meteorology and our vehicle population, which is all important when we're looking at emissions as a whole from our on-road vehicles. So just keying in on our transportation sector trends. In 2016, no large surprise, transportation is our largest source of greenhouse gas emissions at 36%. It has slightly decreased from 2015. And then in comparison to 1990 levels, transportation emissions have reduced around 20%, which may be due to fuel economy standards, but we are also seeing an increase in vehicle miles traveled on our roads. We'll go into more detail of reasoning why in our report. So as far as electricity consumption sector, I gave you an update at our last DC4 meeting on what we were doing. So up until this year, the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the electricity consumption sector were calculated with SIT. This year, we are aligning our methodology with our partners in Massachusetts and Connecticut to account for our renewable energy credits. The key difference between SIT and our new refined methodology is accounting for the renewable energy credits purchased and sold by Rhode Island retailers. So as far as electricity consumption sector trends, again, it's our second largest emitting source, no surprise. In 2016, we see around 26% of our total emissions from the sector. Taking a look at 2015 and 2016, emissions have been reduced by around 11%. And comparing it to 1990, they have slightly increased. We're going to attribute, as of right now, we're in more discussions, but attributing this decrease to our energy efficiency programs. Rhode Island consistently ranks in the top 5 of the nation for the ACEEE scorecard. And our residential heating sector, what we do as our methodology to calculate emissions, we rely on the state inventory tool put out by EPA. The SIT tool is populated by EIA energy information, specifically for natural gas consumption. National Grid reports that information to EIA, and we pull the Rhode Island specific data. The CO2 emissions from this sector are calculated by multiplying energy consumption by the emissions factor for all of the different fuels that go into the heating sector. So our residential heating sector is the 3rd largest source of emissions in our state. 17%. Taking a look at comparing 2015 and 2016, we've seen a slight, pretty big decrease. Again, our energy efficiency programs and extreme weather events could have an impact on this for us. So across the board, we just want to put into perspective where does Rhode Island fit in the bigger picture. So here in blue, you see the Rhode Island greenhouse gas emissions broken down by individual sector. In red, we have New England and our nation in green. So across the board, it's really no surprise. We have the same issue here in Rhode Island as in New England with the rest of our partner states and in the nation. We really need to do a lot more in emission reductions in our transportation, energy, and heating sectors. And I think that also, can you just go back over that? That also just, it leaves Rhode Island in a really unique situation. Like, we could make a really big impact on our emission reductions with good policy and tools in place to make those reductions. So as far as our next steps, I referred to our end of the year report, but prior to our release of the end of the year emissions inventory, we are going to be releasing to the EC4 at the October 28th meeting a draft of our emissions update. In November, we would like to hold a public informational session, reporting out, answering questions on what we've done. And then in December will be the final release of our update.
Allison, so when I have time for questions, a lot of, when I see this, I have a million questions. Why did this happen? You know, but I know you said over and over that some of the analysis is to come. So now, should we just be asking more about the methodology and the technical and have a discussion more about like why we're seeing those things later when we've done more analysis?
That's where we can answer your questions now with the numbers, but feel free, please ask those questions if you have about, you know, why is this happening, because we would like to make sure your questions are answered in the end of the year report.
So one question, and I don't know if this is even possible, but like with the heating, for instance, is it possible to use a word Jonathan just used to normalize it for weather so that we would know that we're actually way more efficient, but we had a polar vortex, or you know that it was that we consumed more because of weather conditions, but per you know energy unit we're more efficient, or can the data be manipulated that way?
I am not sure, but that's something, that's a really great question to see so we can equalize what we're looking at.
Julie, did you have it?
Well, the only thing I was going to add to that question is, can't you use heating degree days to help with that? Because that sort of gives you the index ratio.
I'd love to talk to
Put
you
Jim on the team.
if you could provide more information.
Done.
Thank you.
But similarly with the electricity consumption and the way people are running AC all the time now, again, you know, I wonder on that side too.
Heating degree days,
In
cooling
degree days,
degree days.
yes, right, the answer is
Okay. Good information, thank you.
You know, this is just wonderful data to look at. It is kind of head scratching that the two sectors that have the biggest drops are the two where there's not a price on carbon. And that's just kind of funny and ironic. And I'll be curious what sense you all make of that.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not that we shouldn't price carbon. But the other slide on the Rhode Island in the US highlights for me how, in addition to measuring our success in terms of tons of CO2, it's also the kind of partnerships and the qualitative ways that we find to reduce CO2 matter as a model for the nation. Because those green bars are awfully big.
Yes, absolutely.
Other questions from the C4 group? Mike?
Maybe I don't understand it completely,
Can you
but
speak up a little?
if we are looking at our heating and reducing the amount of greenhouse gas from heating, and maybe it's by electrifying some of our homes and reducing natural gas and heating oil, shouldn't we expect an increase in electric consumption as a result? And is it to the point that one is going to offset the other, or do we expect less of an increase in electric consumption with a decrease in heat?
I'm gonna turn that over to Carol,
Sure.
our energy
It's a
expert.
good lead in for our SEI.
And you'll see some more analysis from SEI on that, Mike, but it is a question that goes to the staging of actions on this. So to your point, an increase in electricity used to be, if you had the same fuels, then that would lead to an increase in emissions. If in fact you are getting to zero emission electric sector, then an increase in electricity does not increase emissions proportionally. So if in fact your electric sector is fueled entirely by zero emission sources, which it isn't today, but we're getting to a third. Once you do that, then you can make the transfer to beneficial electrification, whether it's of heating or transportation. And you don't have to wait. They can be done simultaneously, but what Rhode Island has done well is first the efficiency. So you reduce the amount of overall usage, then you green it as much as possible, and then you get going on the electrification. So timing matters on this and staging matters on it. I think people have been concerned about that question. Once we start getting to, again, today we are at more than a third. Once we start getting in that range, then I think people become more comfortable with planning for a transition going forward. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Well, thanks, Allison. We will have you back. And this data does raise a lot of questions, and I think your analysis will help answer them, but we may want to dig deeper.
Yes.